Hey everyone, we're gonna do a IG live in about 1 to 2 minutes. We're just gonna let people stream in. So I'm gonna be doing like 2 Chinese New Year themed dishes, and it's gonna be really fun and chill. I haven't done this in a long time, so let's hope it goes well. So as you can see, I have everything set up. It shouldn't take too long, hopefully. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the session. I think we're gonna get started, let's say right about now. No, let's give it another minute. But I hope all your Chinese New Year is going really well. I think we all had a really nice feasting session over the last week, myself included, and all like gearing up to go back to work. And yeah, I actually haven't done an IG live in almost 2 years. I think like when COVID first hit in 2020. I did like maybe 3 or 4, and then the whole of last year we stopped doing it because I think people just kind of got bored of doing lives. So yeah, it's kind of fun to do it again. It's super nerve-wracking because like when you do stuff live, obviously you can't just like rewind or like undo if you mess up, but kind of embrace the wabi-sabi, the imperfection of an IG live. And it's kind of fun, you know, like real life isn't always perfect. So okay, so let's get into it. Today's session is actually sponsored by Senoko. Of course, I think most of us know them as like an energy provider, but I think most of you probably don't know, myself included, that they've been around since 1977. They have one of the lowest rates in town. I'm sure if you do your research, your due diligence to compare all the rates between all the electrical providers, I'm sure you'll find that Senoko is one of the lowest. And the great thing about Senoko is that there's no hidden fees. So I think for some other brands, maybe you can find that you might find that the rates are a bit lower, but there might be hidden fees when you actually want to check out or sign up with them. So Senoko is very upfront about all their fees. And today's session is kind of like a very fun, like there's nothing hard sell about this. It's just, so Senoko just wanted to have this Huat session, and I'm actually the third and the last person doing these Chinese New Year sessions. It's just to spread good vibes, positive energy, which is all what I'm about. And if you want to check out the other 2 sessions that have already finished, you can go onto their website and check the videos out. And if you want to check out more deals that are available, you can actually click on the link in the pinned comment that I've pinned, yes. And just fill out your details. They just want like your contact information, a very simple questionnaire, and I think there's like some really amazing prizes to be won. And I think let's get started into our first video. I just want to give you a disclaimer that I hurt my foot like 2 days ago, so I'm going to be moving very slowly and hobbling around, but I'll do my absolute best to make sure that the session goes smoothly. And the first dish actually is super simple. We're sort of like making a very simple sauce using one of the core CNY ingredients, which is of course bak kwa. As you can see, I think we're all super familiar with this. My mom, when she was working, she used to get so much bak kwa sent from like her colleagues and business partners, and I don't know, my family was never really crazy about bak kwa. Like we can eat this, we enjoy it, but after like 2-3 pieces, you feel like super gelat. It's just so rich and yeah, it's quite intense of flavor. So there was always like bak kwa left over, and we were always trying to find like creative ways to use it all up. And I remember like in secondary school, and even when we started working, like we would try to make sandwiches and bring it to work. And there was one day I opened up a sandwich and it was like a bak kwa sandwich. It was just like white bread with mayonnaise and bak kwa, which is like the strangest combination. And there was a bit of cucumber inside just because, you know, needed to be a bit healthy. And ever since then it was like, well, actually bak kwa does work in many different things. I think one of my favorite preparations for like uses for bak kwa is to use it in like stir fries. So you just mince it really fine, and you just like, because the bak kwa already has a bit of oil and fat into it, so when you fry the rice, you don't actually need to add too much oil. You just put the bak kwa in first, you let some of the fat render, the oil comes out, and then you fry the rice in that aromatic bak kwa oil. So we're going to do something in a similar vein today. I'm going to be using noodles. These are jade noodles. I've already boiled them like an hour before, because I don't think you want to see me spending 5 minutes boiling noodles on a live video. There's nothing interesting in that. But these are one of my favorite noodles. You can buy them from Singsyeong. I have a funny story about this. I did an event once where I served jade noodles, and I served them in like a homemade prawn, sort of like a prawn noodle broth with like pork and and pork bones and like a lot of prawn shells. And one of the guests asked me like, oh, why are these noodles called jade noodles? And I said, I don't know, actually that's what is written on the packet, so that's why I call them jade noodles. It actually says white jade noodles. Yeah, like I said, you can get these at Sheng Siong. They're quite they're quite readily available, not hard to find. And the thing I like about them is they're quite like, Chinese word is like Huat, like very smooth, and they've got a good sort of like chewiness to it. So I think it holds onto sauces really well. But even in like something like a noodle soup, it also does work well because like it's got really nice addictive texture. So for the sauce, I'm going to be doing a combination of two ideas. The first idea is sort of like a Chinese chili oil. I think if you go on TikTok, you'll be seeing a lot of these like instant ramen, like make it fancy kind of techniques. And it's basically, this is kind of like half that and half something else. So for a dry Chinese chili, usually the base is like, you basically have dehydrated chilies that have been finely minced up like this. The ones I'm using are called Shantung chilies. As you can see over here, very readily available in like local supermarkets. But if you have something else like just dried chili flakes, even like gochugaru, which is like Korean chili flakes, that will work as well. You don't need to go out and specially buy this. It's just like whatever you have in your pantry will work. So that is the dry element. We also have a few other dried aromatics. I'm going to be adding bay leaves. So a couple of leaves of bay leaves. I have some star anise as well. We have some cinnamon sticks. And finally, we have some cloves. So all these are gonna like, all the aromatics are gonna like permeate into the oil, but you obviously don't want to bite into like a stick of cinnamon or even like a star anise. So when the oil cools down, we have to remove all of this. So just bear that in mind. And the second part of this chili oil thing that I'm going to make is actually based off of like a Cantonese style ginger scallion sauce. I think that's one of the things that I made during lockdown in 2020, and it was like quite a big hit. So we're going to add in not just dried aromatics as you can see here, but also fresh aromatics. I have some thinly sliced green onion I'm going to add into our bowl. And you just want to make sure that the bowl is heat proof because we're going to add in super hot oil later on. Instead of adding ginger, today I'm going to be adding garlic just because these things are very flexible. It's just like whatever you feel like eating at the time. So I'm going to add in quite a fair bit of garlic because I love garlic. Who doesn't? And of course, the star of our show, I have some bak kwa that I've finely minced up. Now the great thing about the bak kwa in this is the great thing about bak kwa in this sauce, even though it's not really traditional, I think it works really well because the sauce is really spicy. We're going to season it with soy sauce, we're going to season it with vinegar, so you got the savory, you got the salty, and you got the sour from the vinegar. And the bak kwa just has this like jerky kind of taste to it, and it's just going to give it a bit of sweetness that isn't really expected. And I think that's why it's going to be really, really good. So I'm just going to add in the bak kwa. So this is a great recipe for all of you who have leftover bak kwa and you just want to use it all up. Since it is a bak kwa chili oil, I'm just going to add in, be quite generous with it. And because for our second dish, we're actually going to we're going to deep fry some pork. I have a gigantic pot of oil going. I just want to make sure that it's hot enough so that it cooks out the spring onions and the garlic. It's quite hot, actually it's very hot now. I am now going to just pour the sizzling hot oil over, and this is going to bubble up quite aggressively. So I don't know if you can hear it because like my AirPod is in my ear, but it is sizzling. It's bubbling. And not only are we cooking the garlic, the heat is also going to release all the flavors from the star anise, the cinnamon, the cloves, the bay leaf. And you know, when you usually make this in Chinese cooking, you would just pour a lot of oil, like absolutely covered, swimming in oil. I try to make this a bit healthier by not using that much. Because honestly, the truth is you don't really need that much. You just need enough to sort of like cover, as you can see, basically. It's just barely covering the surface of all the ingredients. And then we're gonna simply just stir it up. and it already smells amazing. I wish you could smell this. And the color from the dried chilies is really gonna come out here. And you can see that basically the oil is already starting to change color into this like beautiful orange hue. And that's coming really from the dried chilies. Now I didn't add a lot of spring onion, but you know, this is really customizable to your liking. If you like more spring onions, just add more of that. If you like it more garlicky, like I do, add more of that. And you can't even tell that there's bak kwa. It kind of like disappears into the chili, but trust me, when you eat it, you're gonna know it's there. So at this stage, you basically would just want to let everything cool down until it's room temperature, and then you want to fish out all the stuff that shouldn't be eaten, like the cinnamon, the bay leaf, and giving it a bit of time in the oil also allows it to sort of extract a bit more flavor. But because we're doing IG Live, we're going to not wait, and I'm just going to show you what the final dish would look like. So in a bowl over here, I am going to get some of this lovely jade noodles. They're all a bit clumped together now because they've been sitting on the counter for quite a while now, but the sauce is going to loosen it up. So you can, I mean, you just saw how this is done. It's basically not seasoned at all. There's no salt, there's no pepper, there's no acidity, and that's okay because we're going to do that at the end. And the reason why I do that at the end is because like if you start adding vinegar now and you have like a lot of spring onions, the acidity from the vinegar is going to discolor your spring onions. So I like to basically dress it or finish the whole dish at the end. And this allows the chili oil, bak kwa chili oil thing to be kept a lot longer. I think something like this could be kept like 5 to 7 days. Whereas if you start dressing it with vinegar, you can still eat it, but the spring onions are going to lose all that beautiful, vibrant green color that makes this so beautiful. And you can see it's already looking pretty dang good. The oils from the chili oil have basically loosened up the noodles. It allows them to separate, so don't worry too much about them clumping together. And now we're going to season with a few things. Acidity, first of all, I'm using rice vinegar. It's a Japanese rice vinegar. You can use Chinese rice vinegar if you want, or even something like Jingjiang vinegar, which is the black vinegar that you eat with dumplings. Amazing in this. I love oyster sauce. To me, it's like one of the Chinese cheat codes because it just has like so much flavor. It makes everything so tasty. And it does have MSG, which obviously goes a long way as well. I don't add too much of that because the flavor is quite strong. And I do want to be able to taste the bak kwa and the chili oil because that's the star of the show. And the salt element, of course, comes from soy sauce. So just a tiny splash. I think that was pretty good. So now we simply just toss everything together like so. And you can see, like, I honestly didn't add too much oil. The bulk of it was the dried stuff, like the bak kwa, the chili, the dried chilies, and that's why I don't like adding too much oil to these chili oil dishes because you can really go overboard if you are not careful. And of course, if you're trying to make a healthier version of this, cutting down on the oil is a great way to do it. And don't forget that the bak kwa, of course, also has some of its own oils and fats. But I think that looks pretty good. And now we can actually plate up. Where's my plate? Oh, my plate's here. So I'm not going to be too fancy with this, but I think y'all hold me to high standards, so I'm going to try my best to do a nice little twirl. I'm almost done with the first recipe, which means I'm going to be able to take some questions before I move on to the second one. So if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat below. If you have any questions about Senoko as well, I believe someone from their team is online and they can, it actually looks like pasta now that I look at it. But it's all delicious and that's what matters the most. I'm going to spoon over some of the extra bak kwa. If I had more spring onions, I would use some of that to give it a bit more color, a bit more vibrancy. But what I do have actually is a bit of sakura ebi, like baby shrimp. I also love this. It's also one of my other like cheat codes, so to speak. Sakura Abi just makes like noodles, rice, taste amazing. And you don't need a lot. It's just got a lot of umami, a lot of sweetness. And that is our first dish. It's like a bakwa chili oil jade noodles. The recipe really was just for the chili oil sauce with the bakwa. It's savory, it's sweet, it's spicy, it's got the acidity from the rice vinegar, it's got a lot of umami from the oyster sauce. And it keeps really well. I think something like this can last, like I said, 5 to 7 days. You can leave it in the fridge. Eat it with noodles, spoon it on top of rice. If you're weird, put it on toasted bread. It's all good. Okay, so I'm going to take some questions before I move on to the next dish. There's no questions. Interesting way to use bakwa. We'll give it a go. Thank you. I hope it turns out well. Jade noodle, probably because of the spinach and vegetables that are the main ingredients of the noodle. I don't think there's actually any spinach or vegetables because if there's spinach, the color of the noodle would be green. So, I don't know, it's something interesting to think about. I actually genuinely don't know the answer to that. What gel Ross, this is a cooking show, Ross. Okay, so let's move on to our next dish. For those of you who just joined us, I am doing a live cooking show with Senoko as part of their Chinese New Year Huat session. It's just sort of like very casual, very fun, chill, laid back, good vibes only session where I'm going to teach you 2 dishes that incorporate like Chinese New Year ingredients. The first, of course, was a bakwa chili oil noodle, and the second dish we're actually going to use mandarins, which this one I'm pretty dang sure none of you can say that you don't have, because I'm sure the house, wherever you're living, is like over flooding with oranges right now. What I've actually done is I have juiced the oranges into an orange juice over here. Now you want to be careful with this because Mandarin oranges, the kind that you used to buy in the end, sometimes they're not very good. So you have to taste it to make sure that it's not too bitter, but it's okay if it's bitter because we're just going to compensate with a bit of sugar. And the dish we're actually going to be making is kolo yok, or like Cantonese style sweet and sour pork. It's basically a dish where you deep fry pork and then you toss it in a sauce that's, as the name suggests, it's sweet and sour. The sweetness typically comes from like ketchup. So yeah, this is typically always added, and then you of course add a bit more sugar to bulk up the sweetness of the dish. But I've actually seen traditional recipes where they even use like fruits. So I've seen a restaurant where they uses like strawberries in place of, I think they still use ketchup, but the strawberries like give the dish that sweetness and the fruitiness. And instead of using strawberries, I've decided to use orange today. And to actually amp up the fruitiness of the dish, I'm also using dried hawthorn or sansa. I just love the smell of these, and okay, so sorry about the connection termination. Apparently my iPhone overheated, even though I haven't actually done much cooking yet. So let's just get into it before anything bad happens. I have some pork shoulder that I've been marinating overnight in white pepper, soy sauce, and Shaoxing wine. And over here I have a bunch of dry flours. I'm using all-purpose flour, rice, all-purpose flour, corn flour, and a bit of tapioca flour. And the ratios basically you just play around with. I just do 1 to 1 to 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to add our marinated pork into the flour to let it absorb or sort of stick all those starches onto the surface of the pork. And I think people get very confused about which starches and which flours they're supposed to use when they deep fry. And to be honest, like every starch has a very different profile. Like if you think about like American fried chicken, that's typically mostly just all AP flour. Whereas if you talk about something like a Korean fried chicken, it's going to have some cornstarch. So, and of course like Chinese cooking will also use like a different blend. So my suggestion is that every time you eat like a dish, or like a fried dish where you really enjoy the crispness of it, just go home and Google the recipe for that and use that as your like sort of go-to standard flour deep fry batter. So you don't have to be too finicky about this, just chuck it in there, make sure that everything's nice and evenly coated. And I honestly hate deep frying at home. So the moment I thought of doing this dish and I proposed it and it got approved, I I was actually regretting it. But since it's Chinese New Year, I am going to show you all how to make really good golo yolk. So make sure your oil is hot. It needs to sizzle. And the best way to actually check the temperature of the oil is to buy one of these like instant read thermometers. You generally want to fry at least at about 180 degrees Celsius. So if you find that your deep frying game isn't very strong at home, one of the easiest solutions or easiest fixes is probably that your oil honestly isn't hot enough. And yeah, basically you don't have to be, just chuck all of this in and let it fry. And I generally like to go about 10 degrees higher than where I want it to be. So if I want to fry at like 180, I want to make sure that the oil is at about 190, because once you start adding your ingredients in, the temperature is going to drop very rapidly. And a lot of the home appliances generally are not very powerful. The one that I have here is induction, so there's no problem with that. But yeah, a lot of people are very afraid to use like high temperature when you're frying at home, and really that is absolutely the key to making good fried food. I am loading a lot of pork into this pot, so you're gonna have to see how this goes. But I don't want to fry in batches, otherwise it's gonna take too long. So I think that's all the pork. We are just going to let that go. Just give it a quick stir once every couple of minutes, but you can see that it's starting to set. It's starting to set as a really nice, crispy, hard surface on the exterior. And the great thing about this is I can actually do both things at one time. I'm going to start on the sauce for the golo yolk. I'm just going to take a bit of oil into a non-stick skillet. On like a medium heat, you can start sauteing some garlic, which I have chopped over here. Yeah, I don't know, I always feel like golo yolk is one of those dishes that you always eat in restaurants, but you don't typically find it in people's homes. But honestly, the recipe is not that difficult. And we are going to build our golo yolk sauce in the meantime. So I'm going to add in orange juice that I've squeezed, again from the Mandarin oranges. That's quite a lot. I'm going to add in oyster sauce, because it's just going to add a lot of amazing savory flavor. As I mentioned before, ketchup is a necessity. And the sourness from the sauce is coming from rice vinegar. Now we're going to give it a quick stir. And you can see that the color of this, if you've ever seen golo yolk, is not as dark as the sauce that's typically used in traditional golo yolk, because the foundation of this sauce is really the orange. So it's going to be a much lighter colored sauce at the end of the day. I'm going to add a bit more oyster sauce and a bit more ketchup. A lot of this is really just adjusting to your taste bud. If you like it a bit more sour, you can always add a bit more rice vinegar. But I think this is good to go. I think the pork is more or less done. It's been frying, I want to say, for about 4 or 5 minutes. Pretty high temperature. Give it another minute or so. The garlic is sizzling. Things are going to move very fast from here, so try to keep up with me. I have here some chopped pineapple, onions, red and green bell peppers, and those are the typical, I don't want to say condiments, but they are the ingredients that are used in the golo yolk. I actually love eating the pineapple in this. I don't know why, I just love pineapple in general. It's like, I love pineapple in savory dishes, but not so much on pizza. I think the pork is done. I'm going to take it out onto a tray lined with paper towels. You can just drain out a bit of the excess fat. So if you want to do a healthier version of this, first of all, you can swap the pork for a leaner meat. Like honestly, chicken will work too, but it just wouldn't be golo yolk anymore. If you don't want to deep fry, you can also air fry or like bake this. The texture honestly wouldn't be quite the same, but it will be a much healthier version if those are your goals. So we're just gonna leave the pork to rest over there. I'm gonna saute the vegetables. And for the vegetables, you don't want them to brown, so you want to lower the heat to like a medium. You just want them to soften. You want to cook out the raw flavor of the bell peppers and the onion. And the pineapple, basically, you don't have to worry too much about because that's going to give the dish a bit more bite. And let this cook for about 1 to 2 minutes. You can hear the sizzling. I'm going to add in our fried pork. You can see that the dish is already starting to come together really nicely. And I love the colors in this dish. It's just like so vibrant and colorful. And this is going to be my dinner for tonight. Saute everything up. And can now simply just drizzle in that sauce that we made. Again, it's orange juice, oyster sauce, rice vinegar, ketchup. I'm going to season it with sugar later on. It's very, very thin now. And that's why I have a bit of cornstarch on the side to thicken it up into that typical Chinese sticky gravy consistency. And you want to give it a bit of time in the sauce as well because the kolo yolk has that starch coating on it, which allows it to absorb some of that delicious sweet and sour sauce. And you can already see it starting to thicken slightly, but I always have a bit of cornstarch on standby in case we need to push it a bit further. This is actually looking pretty good. I'm going to add in a bit more sauce. And actually it smells amazing. Like, oh, I forgot to add in the sansa. Where's the sansa? My bad. So the sansa that I got is basically a dried version. I'm just going to chuck in a few pieces and we're going to pick it out before we eat it. The sansa is going to give it a really nice, fruity flavor. Just copy and paste.
I tried to paste, there's nothing there.
So we had a bit of a technical issue because we had to restart the live. You can check out the pinned comment which is going up right about now. Alright, so everything looks nice and sticky, sweet and savory. Yeah, as I mentioned before, because the base is orange juice, it's going to be a lot lighter than the typical kolo yolk because that's predominantly mostly ketchup. But you can see that I think we did a pretty good job over here. The pork is nice and crispy. And glaze it all over. Vegetables are nice and soft. I think we are actually ready to plate up. So this is a great dish for sharing. Of course, you would always eat this with rice. But I am not adverse to eating this with noodles. I think any kind of carb would work really well for this. It's cornmeal food, so I'm not going to be too fussed over how it looks, but I'm just going to pour it into my bowl. We didn't even need the cornstarch, so you can see that even though the sauce looks really thin when I added it in, because of the starch that exists on the surface of the pork, when you naturally simmer it together, it's just going to naturally thicken up. And also, of course, the oyster sauce, the ketchup do have their own emulsifiers, their own stabilizers. So they do thicken up as you simmer them, as you boil them. And that is the dish, guys. So in like, this honestly went a lot faster than I thought it was gonna be. We have the jade noodles with bakwa chili oil, which honestly the chili oil you can just do in advance. You can keep it for 5 to 7 days in the fridge, eat it with whatever you want. Great way to use leftover bakwa. And of course, what we just cooked, which is my golo yolk, made instead with juice of mandarin oranges, deep fried pork, of course, bell peppers, onions, and a little bit of pineapple. And this was also sort of like done in no time. I mean, we did 2 dishes in basically 30 minutes. So if you're doing this at home, I am pretty sure you can do it a lot faster than me. So since we have quite a bit of time, I'm just going to go on and see if you have any questions for me. Yeah, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask me now. Otherwise, yeah, so go check out the website in the pinned comment on the IG Live. Make sure that you sign up because I think there's almost like $600 to $700 worth of prizes to be won. And it's really simple. You just fill up your contact information. I think you have to answer a question of like what you ate for Chinese New Year or something like that. And yeah, not a lot to it. Let's see. All right. Okay, so I'm just going to go through the most recent questions that were around. What was in the hot chili oil? Okay, so there's 2 components. The dried components were dried chili flakes. The ones I used were Shandong chilies. You can get this at Xinxiang. Hashtag not sponsored by Xinxiang. And then for the other dried aromatics, we use star anise, cinnamon, cloves, and bay leaf. Yeah, and then you have to fish them out at the end because you obviously don't want to bite into those things. For the fresh aromatics, we use garlic and just spring onion. And of course, we use some of the chopped up bakwa in that as well. You can add ginger if you want. It's sort of like a blend between a Chinese chili oil and a ginger scallion sauce. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. It's like, is the recipe saved somewhere, please? Yes, I will probably save this whole IG Live and like I'll write down the recipe, what do you call it, the measurements, so that you can all try this at home and attempt it. What was the last spice you put in? I think you're talking about a golo yolk, in which case I added, I can't find it. Oh, I added this, which is dried hawthorn berry, sanza. This has a really amazing fruity sort of aroma to it. I don't know if you remember eating like hawthorn candies as a kid. It comes in like a little cylinder and then you eat like little discs. Yeah, so basically that is sanza or hawthorn, and this is like what the real version looks like. It's just a really nice fruity aroma, and yeah, so my sister loves to boil this with water and just make like hawthorn tea, so to speak. And I just thought like, since we have the orange elements in this sauce, we can just amp up the fruitiness of it by adding a little bit of sansa. But we have to fish it out because it's gonna really, because it is dried, it's gonna be very leathery if we eat this. So that was just a little thing that I added. Marinade for the pork was just white pepper, soy sauce, and Shaoxing wine. If you can't take alcohol, just omit the wine completely. But yeah, basically I didn't add salt to the dish because the marinade was already quite salty. And oh, thank you Russell for answering the question. Why do you use cornstarch for the thickener, and is that traditional? Yeah, I think cornstarch is probably the most commonly used like Chinese thickener. Like if you go to a zhicha restaurant, they will always have a cornstarch slurry next to them because any sauce that you add in, if it's too watery, they will just add a cornstarch slurry. And if you're using that, basically, I never measure how much water to flour ratio. I just add until I can mix it into a smooth liquid that I can pour in. But what you do need to make sure of is that if your liquid is at a very, very hard boil, and you want to add your thickener, you want to take it off the heat first and then while you're stirring, drizzle in the liquid, and then bring it back onto the heat. Because if it's at a rolling boil and you drizzle in a cornstarch slurry, it's just going to cook into a lump of starch, which obviously you do not want. So take it off the heat, stir it while you're adding, and then back onto the heat, and then as it boils, the thickening will take effect. But to answer your question, yes, cornstarch is very common in Chinese cooking. In Japanese cooking, they would use katakuriko, which is like a potato starch, or the very top, like kaiseki restaurants would use kuzu, and kuzu is the most prized because it's very, very clear. So you can thicken something that like a clear dashi, and you would not get any cloudiness from it. But kuzu is also very expensive. So for most intents and purposes, cornstarch will do the job really well. Any more questions for the jade noodles? I don't know. I just followed the packet instructions. Actually, no, I didn't follow the packet instructions. I just boiled it until it became edible. It says 5 minutes. I think that's about right. And it still keeps pretty well. You can see like these noodles I boiled about an hour ago. They still got really nice elastic texture. That's why I love jade noodles. They're quite forgiving. And they've got a really nice bite. And yeah, you can see that they do clump together quite a bit. But that's because I haven't dressed them in any oil or any sauce whatsoever. But once you toss it, you can see that it just separates really nicely. So that's my recommendation for the noodles. And I don't think there's any more questions. So are there any more questions? No? Okay, so I always rinse cold water with the noodles, just to wash off a bit of starch, and also if you just want to arrest the cooking. So I always put it through a strainer, and then I toss it in a bit of cold water, and then I just reserve it like so. What brand of bakwa are you using? I don't know, like I always find bakwa around the house. It's not sponsored, so I honestly can't tell you. I think it's like Mei Zhen Xiang. So honestly, any kind of bakwa will do. Bakwa varies very wildly. So like if you use a very, very fatty cut of meat, obviously the bite is going to be a lot softer. But for this kind of intents and purpose, like to use into a sauce, I wouldn't use like the top quality one, because you should probably eat that on its own, in the same way that you wouldn't use like the best red wine you can get your hands on for cooking, right? Okay, so sorry I missed a small part, just diced bakwa fried with chili oil. Sort of, yeah, I added the bakwa into all the ingredients, and then I poured very hot oil at about like 180 degrees Celsius, let everything sizzle together, let it cool down, remove all the like cinnamon, star anise, bay leaf, the stuff that you don't want to eat, and then you can store it for about 5 to 7 days, and it's good to go. Eat that with noodles. What's recommended for spaghetti noodles? I mean, you can eat this with spaghetti as well. It just might be a little bit weird. I don't like spaghetti. I generally like a bit more like Japanese flavors, because I think that they're a bit lighter, like the way Japanese cook pastas. I guess they don't use a lot of like cheese or cream, just a lot of fresh ingredients. But if you wanted to, I'm sure this will work really well. I mean, if you look at this right now, it actually does look a bit like spaghetti. So just different kind of bite. Yeah, so okay, I am just going to give it maybe another couple more minutes. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them now. But yeah, these were the two dishes that we cooked. The polo yolk, or sweet and sour pork with mandarins, like mandarin orange juice. And we also have the bakwa chili oil with leftover bakwa. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the session. Sorry there was like a technical difficulty in the middle there, but I think we recovered pretty well. And yeah, I haven't done a live session for a really long time, so I hope you enjoyed it. It's been quite fun doing these things, quite nerve-wracking, but very rewarding. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you're looking for the recipe will be posted later on. I just need to like type it out, and so you don't need to like try to write it down now or whatever. Do make sure to go to the Senoko website to get. Basically, it's just amazing chance to win pretty amazing prizes, and you don't really have to do much. Just fill out your contact information and all that stuff. And that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a really, really good weekend, and happy Chinese New Year.